Hey, everybody, it's Rusty Stahl with the Fund the People podcast. July 13th is the deadline to submit your public comments to the federal government and to sign on to the National Council of Nonprofits sign-on letter regarding the proposed regulations for federal funding. And this is really crucial. So for that reason, we are giving you this summer bonus episode of my conversation with Sarah Saadian of the National Council of Nonprofits. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you take action today. Welcome, everybody, to the Fund the People podcast and a very special installment of our Defend Nonprofits, Defend Democracy series here on the show. I'm your host, Rusty Stahl, and I'm delighted to be back in Washington, D.C., my college town, here at the Switch and Board podcast studio for an in-person conversation with Sarah Saadian from the National Council of Nonprofits. And I'm a big fan of the National Council of Nonprofits. I think in the last year and a half, they have saved our sector and to some extent, it sounds like hyperbole, but saved our society as well from a complete funding freeze of federal dollars going to nonprofits, states, and businesses across the country, which would have been devastating to the economy and everything else. So I know you follow the National Council of Nonprofits and what they're doing. If you watch and listen to this podcast, you are probably paying attention to the National Council of Nonprofits. So I'm pleased today to be in conversation with one of their key policy staff members. Before we get started, a quick reminder that the Fund the People podcast is a program of Fund the People, the national organization that advocates for investment in the nonprofit workforce across the country. And we are a nonprofit. And so I want to invite you to donate to Fund the People. We are inviting folks to become monthly donors to Fund the People. So if you can give $10, $25, $50 a month. You can go to our website, fundthepeople.org, click on Connect, and get to our donation button. Whether or not you can donate, I invite you to follow our work. Just search for Fund the People on LinkedIn or join our mailing list. Again, go to fundthepeople.org, click on Connect, and there you can join the mailing list and get all the news and information and resources that we send out. So, having said that, I'm pleased to introduce our guest today. Sarah Saadian is Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Campaigns with the National Council of Nonprofits. She has more than 15 years of experience with national advocacy campaigns and has successfully advanced federal policy on Capitol Hill. Immediately prior to joining NCN, Sarah served as Senior Vice President at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. She graduated from the University of Connecticut School of Law and is a member of the Virginia State Bar. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's been awesome to get to know you in the last couple months and appreciate our conversations and you making the time to do this.
My pleasure. I'm really excited about what we have to talk about today. There's a lot going on in D.C., and I want all of your listeners to know how what's happening in D.C. impacts them and what they can do about it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think people are hungry to know exactly those things. And somehow it's hard to get the word out, both about all the things that are happening and what people can do.
Yeah.
There's so much noise, and this is like a job on top of everyone's job now. So
absolutely. It feels like the news is constant. It's crisis after crisis in DC. And part of our job is to try to look through the forest through the trees, like find out what are the things that are really impacting nonprofits, helping to explain it to folks in easy terms so they don't have to have a law degree to read regulatory text, and then make it really easy for them to take action with their members of Congress and other policymakers.
Yeah. Well, as somebody without a law degree, I appreciate that. Okay, so tell us about your role. What's your job? What do you do, and how does it fit into the organization's work?
So I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Campaigns, which means that I oversee a really great dynamic team of folks who do all of our work engaging with Congress and with administration, but also supporting state associations of nonprofits and the work that they do in their communities to advance policy. So we work at all levels of government. There's a lot going on that we're tracking. But really what we're doing is looking for opportunities to make the voices of nonprofits heard on Capitol Hill. So we're building relationships where we can. We're analyzing legislation. We're putting out the calls to alert when things are bad and when members of Congress need to hear from nonprofits in their state. So there's a lot of advocacy involved, a lot of working with others and working through coalitions to make sure that nonprofits are represented well.
Mm-hmm. And for people who may not be familiar with National Council of Nonprofits, you mentioned the state associations, and the state associations of nonprofits are members of NCN. So if a nonprofit joins its state association, let's say the New York Council of Nonprofits, where I live, or Cal Nonprofits in California, or the Minnesota, the Minnesota
Council of Nonprofits. Yeah.
Then that nonprofit, which has joined its state association, is sort of automatically a member of NCN, right?
That's right. So we work primarily through our state and regional associations of nonprofits. And together we represent 37,000 organizations across the country, making us the largest network of nonprofits in North America. And those member organizations run the gamut. They look like the nonprofit sector. So most of them are small, they're community-focused, they're service-oriented, they're in their communities, stepping up to fill gaps that are left by government and the private sector. So they're running after-school programs for kids or food banks or shelters. They are helping people in a crisis. They're helping their communities recover after a disaster. So those are the organizations that are really there in their community for the long haul. They are trusted partners with the people that they serve, and we work on their behalf to make sure that they are well represented.
So if you're listening and you're in a nonprofit, you're on the board, or you're an ED or something else, if you don't know whether you've joined your state association or not, or you haven't joined, this is the year, this is the moment. You can go to the National Council of Nonprofits website and find a map of the country, I think, and
that's right.
Click on your state. And there may be multiple. There might be a city association or a regional association in your region of the state, or a statewide, or both. So join your state association of nonprofits and you'll be plugged in. So the state associations really work on state policy. If they work on policy, it's really more at the state level primarily, right?
And they take the lead on the state policy, and we try to play a supportive role to them there. But they really take the lead, and we take the lead on the federal policy. And then together, we're really, making sure that the full ground of policy work is being covered.
Mm-hmm. So NCN has grown a lot since the beginning of 2025, both, I think, in staff size and programming. And the work has really not let up since January of 2025. I was wondering if you could just share, how has the staff grown and what's it like to work there?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in January of 2025, when Diane, our CEO, came on board, there were 9 staff in total. Now, I think we're at 22, 23. I don't have the exact number in front of us, but it's been a period of really rapid growth, which is exciting. And there's a lot of possibility here. What I think is cool is that we have some people at the organization who have served for a very long time. So Rick, our COO, has been there 20 years. Tiffany, who's on the policy team, has been there 10 years. But we also have a lot of people who are just starting out at NCN with fresh ideas and new perspectives. And so between all of those people, we're able to really approach our work in new and different ways. And we've had to do that because of the threats that we're seeing in DC. It's been really helpful to us to have that mixture of new and older perspectives about how do we rise in this moment? How do we meet the challenges that nonprofits are facing? What new tools and new strategies do we need? And it's been pretty effective so far. When we're able to hold the sector together as a whole, when we're united, we have been effective at pushing back against some of the most harmful policies that the administration has pushed forward.
Yeah, shout out to all of you there, to Diane and everybody on the team and the board and all the state associations. And also I want to shout out the staff because there was a big executive transition, right? As the presidential transition happened in the federal government, so did an executive transition happen at NCN,
Yeah.
making it even more fraught in terms of what would happen at NCN, at least
Yeah.
from an outside view. And so Tim Delaney was the longtime president and CEO prior to Diane. He also helped save our sector and our country a couple of times through NCN during COVID and other things. So shout outs to them as well, to Tim and Donna and the folks who were there prior. It's just been incredible to witness what you all have done. And I think it's even more incredible given that executive I mean, Diane started on what, January 1 or January
Yeah, I think it was
15
maybe in
or
the
something?
first week of
It's first week.
of January, and within a couple of weeks, new president has been inaugurated. OMB tries to freeze $3 trillion in funding almost overnight. So talk about coming in with a fire hose, right?
Yeah.
She really didn't have a lot of time to catch her breath.
And none of you have. Really, the sector hasn't either. It's almost like a microcosm of what's happened to us over the last year and a half. I'm hoping in this episode, in this conversation, we can help people kind of get their heads around what has happened and like help folks think about exactly really how have things changed in our field, because with the level of burnout, the level of exhaustion that we already had coming into 2025, and now obviously even more, it's sometimes hard to remember what has happened and where we've been. So my question is, how do you think about sort of what is being done or attempted to be done to the nonprofit sector by the Trump administration?
Well, when I look at the last 18 months, I see that nonprofits are facing unprecedented historic threats, both financial threats, but also political threats. And it's putting them under so much strain. So when you look at what this administration has done, it's everything from abruptly cutting off funding, putting in new terms and conditions, terminating contracts, withholding grant dollars. All of that it makes it very difficult for nonprofits to keep their doors open, to keep their services open for the people they're serving. But at the same time, we're also seeing this administration escalate this rhetoric, painting nonprofits, denigrating them as being un-American or standing in the way of the American way of life. And you see that in their budget requests. You see that in congressional hearings. You see that in a lot of the rhetoric that they use. And I think that's a new thing for nonprofits to have to face. And we're at the same time seeing really politically motivated investigations, for example, of Southern Poverty Law Center, and threats of investigations and threats to revoke tax-exempt status. All of that is really designed to instill fear in nonprofits, to silence them. And I think when you take a step back to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why would the administration want to go down that path? It's because nonprofits are uniquely positioned in their communities. They are trusted because they have a deep personal relationship with the people that they're serving. They are looked to for guidance. When you're in a crisis, one of the first places you're going to go is to your local nonprofit. So that's really powerful. That means that our sector has a deep connection to the American people in a way that they don't like, that is threatening, because some nonprofits are in opposition to what the administration is pushing. So if they're trying to silence their perceived opponents or to silence organizations that might oppose the policy positions that they're taking, this is their strategy to try to create a lot of fear within the sector and to whittle it away by cutting the funds, by creating distrust with the American people, trying to break into that. So I think it's very intentional, and it's important for us to be thinking about, okay, well, what are the strategies that can hold our sector together, can create a sense of solidarity, and also help nonprofits recognize the unique role that they play in American society as being part of civil society, part of the foundations of what allow democracy to exist.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that has really come into focus for me watching and being part of this experience we're going through, is that the nonprofit sector and philanthropy used to be considered one of the 8 wonders of our democracy. It is, and was considered by administrations, both Republican and Democrat, a jewel of what makes American democracy and the American way of life kind of unique and good and generous and great. I think part of the whiplash of having our own government attack us is that maybe there was a patronizing, overly romanticized view of nonprofits and philanthropy before, right? Everyone's like, oh, that's such good work. But it was, it really is part of our system that doesn't get taught. I don't know how, but you experienced this in law school, but I don't think policymakers or the media or popular culture really acknowledges the role nonprofits play in our economy and in our self-governance and in our freedoms, but it really is embedded in the American system.
I went to a great event recently with conservative voices who were also very concerned about what's happening to nonprofits today and that take issue with the way that the administration is threatening the nonprofit sector. And they made a great point about how the idea that we can freely associate with the people who share our interests, that the nonprofit sector is separate from and independent from government. This is really a reflection of the people coming together to serve their communities. It's something very special. It's something that not all countries have, and that we have to protect. If we care about community and democracy in our nation, we have to make sure that we're protecting the nonprofits that help pool communities together.
Yeah. So one of the things, as you were talking about the different policies and activities that the administration has undertaken, there's a lot of different things. So one of the things that was helpful to me when we did our prep call was you said there's kind of three things going on. There's cutting off funding, there's silencing, and there's sowing distrust. So I wanted to talk about each one because underneath each of those, right, there's a lot of activity. And I think a lot of funders and thought leaders and capacity builders and nonprofits have focused on the funding cuts, the specific cuts. Oh, this organization is losing this grant or contract from the federal government. We do or don't have the money to replace it. And that's the focus kind of the conversation. But it's much more than that is what's going on. So let's start with the funding, because cutting off funding is more than just cutting specific grants. There's the funding freeze attempt that we talked about earlier. There's a term, I don't know if it existed before, of clawing back contracts. There's more too, but could you speak to the attempt to freeze all federal funding? NCN took the administration to court. A judge said, we're not going to do that. We're putting it on hold. But that's still under adjudication because the administration has challenged that ruling and challenged even the right of courts to do those kind of rulings.
Right. So Congress has always had the authority to make decisions about how to spend federal dollars, and they can change their priorities. That's normal. What's not normal are the things that you mentioned. And when I think about what's happening, it's really about undermining the partnership that has long existed between government and nonprofits to make sure that the American people have the essential services they need, whether it's housing or community development or healthcare. All of the things that you have mentioned cause nonprofits to have to think it to themselves, is it even worth applying for or administering federal dollars? Now there's so much uncertainty into a system that used to be very stable. They have to do that calculation. Is it worthwhile to do? And we're worried that if we undermine that partnership enough, you could see communities without the grantees that they need to deliver services. So it's very concerning. And you're right, when 1 week into the presidency, the White House issued a memorandum to all federal agencies, essentially trying to freeze all federal funds overnight. And I think it was in that moment that we realized, okay, we have to go about this work very differently than we've had to before. We have to think about new strategies. We had never been a party to litigation before, and we realized we needed to do something different. So Diane and the team worked late into the night, and by the next morning, we filed our first lawsuit against the administration, seeking to prevent them from freezing those dollars. And we were successful. We have a preliminary injunction. It remains in place. But you're right. The process continues. But what we learned from that is that litigation needs to be an important tool and strategy that we use. It's very powerful, especially in a political environment like we are in today, where the administration is taking actions that are many times unlawful and where we have a Congress that's really unwilling to push back. Litigation becomes really important there. The student loan forgiveness program issue, I think, is a really important one too, where essentially the administration is saying that each new administration can pick and choose which nonprofits are eligible for PSLF. And an important tool that you use to recruit and retain staff. But just adding that little bit of uncertainty into the mix really undermines the program for all nonprofits, right? If you're starting your career and you're deciding between whether or not you want to work at your local nonprofit or get a job with a business, you might start to think to yourself, what if in 8.5 years, when I'm so close to getting loan relief, a new administration comes in and all of a sudden says that where I work is no longer eligible, or the kind of work I do is no longer eligible. You can't rely on that to make really important decisions about your career. And so that's another place where NCN has filed litigation, because we want to make sure that no administration can just arbitrarily cut off certain nonprofits from having access to the program. It's clearly not in the statute. And so we want to make sure that it's available for nonprofits forever. But again, when you look at the overall picture, it's really about undermining those institutions, their ability to receive resources, which is the lifeblood of being able to do work in communities, the inability to recruit and retain staff, right? It undermines the strength of those organizations and the sector as a whole.
I think a theme in what I'm hearing you say is that even if this administration is opposed to certain values or kinds of work that happens in some nonprofits, for example, supporting the health and well-being of LGBTQ people, or helping those who are strangers to this country, who are immigrants. So their public service loan forgiveness, like changes, would impact those kind of nonprofits. But what you're saying is it actually impacts all of them no matter what, because it undermines the program and the future of the program and like the stability and access. And so they're not doing micro targeting. They are doing these broad brush attacks that affect the whole sector.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear who their targets are. And to your point, like nonprofits that work on immigration issues or serve the LGBTQ community or do environmental work or advance racial equity, like those are very clearly the top targets for the administration. But the way that they're doing that work impacts all of us. And also just creating the precedent where an administration can go after the nonprofits it happens to disagree with. Well, what happens the next time? There's a different president who has a different set of priorities, and then they feel empowered to go after different nonprofits, right? You can see how over time, the sector as a whole will be withered away, right? The power taken out, their abilities taken out. So it's really important, I think, especially for organizations that don't work on those issues, to see that they have a stake in the outcome here, right? It's not as though they can just stick their head in the sand and pretend like the issue is going to go away, because it's not going to go away. And we have to see that what happens to one of us could happen to all of us, right? We're all in this together.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it's that slippery slope. Our sector, the nonprofit sector and philanthropy, is accessible to everyone. Anyone can join or start. I mean, you have to find the resources and the time. I'm not saying it's easy, but the sector is not one ideology. It doesn't support one issue. It is a platform upon which any American can lift up their values, advocate for their values. So once you start picking and choosing within that and saying these values are not okay to be nonprofits and these are, it disrupts the entire system. It would be like if the First Amendment said freedom of speech, freedom of religion, but only for these three religions, and these sentences are free to say, but those sentences are not. Well, then you don't have freedom of speech or freedom of religion.
And I think that's why you see some conservative-leaning philanthropy groups and nonprofits. They're also concerned about what happens, because I think they know that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and the shoe's going to be on the other foot, to mix a whole bunch of metaphors here. But once we allow the government to be weaponized against nonprofits based on their missions or based on the fact that the administration, whoever is in power, doesn't like the work that they do, it invites the next administration and the next administration after that to go further and further. And so that's why it's really important that we're keeping that in mind, that this is a strategy that they have. And the way that we confront it best is for nonprofits to be unified in one voice to say, this is not right, and we're not going to stand for it. We're not going to be silenced by the administration's threats.
Yeah. So as we kind of move from funding to silencing, which that would be a great transition sentence, but there's a couple other quick funding things I wanted to cover. So with grants.gov, the web portal that the sector advocated for, to create one place where you could go to get federal funding for federal grants. DOJ took that over, is my understanding. And then they kind of came out with this new certification proposal where nonprofits would need to sign a legal document certifying that you, as a grantee of the federal government, would not do immigration work or LGBTQ or DEI or climate change or whatever those set of things are. And the language is extremely convoluted and confusing, again, for non-lawyers. But that's what my understanding is what it would actually do. And so NCN has also submitted public comments about that. And where does that situation stand in its process?
Yeah, seconding everything that you said. The challenge here is also that those certifications come with a penalty of criminal law, right? So if the administration says that you're violating those certifications, you're, again, putting your organization at enormous risk. And the language is incredibly vague, right? Because the language around diversity, equity, and inclusion is a good example, because what the administration says is illegal DEI is not necessarily what the courts have said is illegal DEI, right? So it opens yourself up to a lot of risk if the administration were to investigate you or to say that you were in violation of these certifications. Thankfully, there's been a real groundswell of nonprofits that have push back against this, and 22,000 organizations submitted public comment during the comment period, which is incredible for a relatively small regulatory change. Right now, we are, as of this moment, we're waiting for the next round of public comment. So when GSA, the General Services Administration, when they send the proposal to the White House for final review, that'll launch another comment period for 30 days. So we'll mobilize nonprofits again. We're going to update our materials and engage folks and encourage them to weigh in, because submitting public comment might feel like, are you throwing something into a black hole? Like, what does it really do? Mm-hmm. But it's incredibly important for slowing down their ability to implement these changes. And ultimately, we could even prevent it from taking place, right? We're building the legal record of why these changes shouldn't take place. So we'll come back to your listeners when that comment period is launched. But just yesterday, we heard breaking news about a massive overhaul to the OMB uniform guidance, which is the guidance that regulates or oversees most federal grant making, right? So sweeping changes that could have really profound impact on nonprofits. And we're digging into that now. But yeah, it's definitely a very changing landscape constantly in DC.
And we are recording this on May 29th. We're not sure when it'll be published. So yesterday you heard this, but
on May 28th we heard it.
Yeah. And where does the public service loan forgiveness process changes? Because this is similar. There was public comment.
There was public comment. I think 16,000 comments were submitted there. We filed litigation. Our first hearing is on June 3rd, and we're not expecting the court to make a decision right then, but we're hoping that the court could make a decision relatively soon thereafter. The rule goes into effect July 1st, so we're trying to see what can we do to prevent that from taking place at that time.
We now also have efforts to mess with fiscal sponsorship. There's a bill in Congress submitted by Ted Cruz in the Senate and another congressperson from Texas in the House called the Sponsor Act, which would impact fiscal sponsors. And then I think there's other executive action happening on fiscal sponsorship.
So I think that goes back to the rhetoric question of how some members of Congress and the White House has been trying to undermine the public view of nonprofits. And we see this come up in the question about fiscal sponsorship. So if you look at a recent hearing in the Ways and Means Committee, there's this sentiment that somehow fiscal sponsorships are shady and that bad things are happening there, when it's really just another tool for nonprofits to do their work in communities. And so there has been some rumblings that we might see legislation this summer that could either curtail the use of fiscal sponsorships or put in place more disclosure rules around it. The bill from Ted Cruz that you mentioned, the Sponsor Act, would impose criminal liability on fiscal sponsors for the actions of the project, even if they had no way of knowing about some of the activity that those projects were doing. Really, it's a way of intimidating those fiscal sponsors out of doing that important work with projects around the country, right? So it's another thing we're concerned about. The IRS has already said that they plan to revise the Form 990, which is the form nonprofits submit annually. And we anticipate that there could be new changes to the 990 form around fiscal sponsorships there too.
I wanted to mention the Medicaid cuts in H.R. 1, the big, beautiful bill, as well, the big reconciliation bill from last summer. So I think those cuts would go into effect after the midterms in the new year, right? The new calendar year, 2027. And those cuts, I imagine, would pull money from nonprofit healthcare organizations like rural hospitals, where the hospitals or health institutions are paid through reimbursement from the federal government for the individual Americans who get their healthcare through Medicaid. I don't know if I've got that right, but to me, that sounds like maybe it's a side effect for them, but it sounds like another way to cut funding to nonprofits as well as to individuals and their healthcare.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. When these cuts happen, it's not as though people's food security needs are going to go away, right? People still need food or they'll be hungry. Their healthcare needs don't go away.
Mm-hmm.
And if these individuals can't access SNAP or Medicaid, they're going to be turning to their local nonprofits in need of services. And so nonprofits are going to be faced with even more demand than they already have and fewer resources, right? For all the reasons we mentioned before. So it means that more people are going to go without, and nonprofits aren't going to be able to have the tools that they need to serve the people in their communities. HR 1 also made really big changes to charitable giving, which there are some positive provisions in HR 1. It included a universal deduction so that any taxpayer can claim up to $1,000 if they're an individual or $2,000 for a married couple to help promote charitable giving, which is great. But that's outweighed by other changes in terms of corporate giving or giving by high wealth individuals to nonprofits. And ultimately, the bill is going to reduce charitable giving by about $5.7 billion every year. So again, we're seeing an effort to cut federal funding, but also to reduce charitable giving to nonprofits.
Yeah, if you want the private sector to take care of problems instead of government, philanthropy is private action, private voluntary action for the public good.
Yeah.
So they're squeezing us from both ends.
One of the strongest arguments I've heard in support of nonprofits comes from Senator Lankford from Oklahoma, conservative Republican, who has said, from his perspective, he wants to see limited government. But he also knows that in order to achieve that policy goal of his, there has to be nonprofits who are able to serve the role that government otherwise would be asked to serve, right? So you can't both have limited government and not a strong network of nonprofits in the nonprofit sector, right? So he sees nonprofits as playing an integral role in communities that he would rather see served by nonprofits than government. So it's an interesting, different, unique perspective on it.
Very important one, though.
Yeah.
Because the more they squeeze out philanthropy, and they're attacking philanthropy and foundations too. I mean, there was other stuff in the initial bill that didn't become law that got taken out, but that would have hurt philanthropy even more. And so when you cut government to the bone and you cut philanthropic giving to the bone, then you get nonprofits that can't serve people, and then you have people dying, and kids and pregnant women and old people just starving and dying. I mean, that is the carnage that this policy agenda would move us toward, I think.
I think that's a great point. Ultimately, we're talking about this in terms of nonprofits and the sector, but nonprofits exist to serve their communities. And if nonprofits aren't able to do that, it ultimately means that people in communities are going to go without. They're not going to have access to the healthy food that they need, or their kids aren't going to have access to enrichment programs, right? The community is what gets hurt the most when nonprofits are threatened in this way.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the funding cuts. Can you talk about, we've kind of woven this in, but anything else you want to talk about with silencing? And in particular, I want to make sure people know that there was that HR 9495, right, back before the inauguration that the sector pushed back on, which we call the nonprofit killer bill. And it's come back a couple times. It was in HR 1 and got taken out. It's come back, I think, 4 times, and it's now back. It's called HR 6800, but it's basically a photocopy of HR 9495. And I've heard that it's probably not going to go anywhere and it's just sitting there, but that's another silencing factor.
Yeah. And what's really
mix.
fascinating, I think, about that example is that it illustrates both the very real political threats that nonprofits are facing, right? Because the bill would essentially grant even broader authority to the executive branch to designate nonprofits as being terrorist organizations with very limited due process, which would very abruptly harm those organizations and their ability to do work. But it's also a story about how nonprofits can be enormously effective in their advocacy, right? This bill has come up many times and it's been stopped because nonprofits were vocal, and you played a really big role in that in terms of mobilizing nonprofits to weigh in on this issue. And when nonprofits make their voices heard, it can have a real and direct impact on what Congress does. So it was included in the earlier draft of H.R. 1, and it was taken out because senators and congressmen were hearing from nonprofits who were worried about what it could mean for them and for the sector as a whole.
Yeah, good point. And so on the third point, sowing distrust, we've just had a lot of rhetoric. And as you said, congressional hearings. And Diane did an incredible job at that hearing called NGOs Gone Wild, representing the sector. But there's just been all kinds of this effort to reframe the sector. So do you want to talk about the hearings or any of these other examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at some of the language that some members of Congress are using and the White House is using, it's a lot of like making nonprofits out to be the boogeyman, right? And trying to claim that nonprofits are somehow agents of foreign governments, that they're these outside forces that are influencing nonprofits to put forward an anti-American agenda, or that nonprofits are really profiting too much off of X, Y, and Z, that they're not truly nonprofits, not truly serving their community, or that they're not really doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so you see hearings like that, NGOs Gone Wild, which even the title of that hearing is kind of preposterous, but it's a real concern because the public needs to know and trust nonprofits, which is why we launched the Nonprofits Get It Done campaign featuring local nonprofits and the really important work that they do, because what we've found is that when the American people are reminded about who nonprofits are, that it's their neighbor stepping up in their community to run an after-school program for kids, or it's a volunteer who's going down to the food bank to help people in their community address hunger. When people are reminded about who nonprofits really are, they maintain a high level of trust with nonprofits. So we can't let this rhetoric really break down that connection that nonprofits have with the public that they serve.
Right. I brought some of the materials that I bought through the campaign. This great canvas bag says nonprofits do the heavy lifting, which I think is my favorite one.
Don't underestimate some good swag. I love some good swag.
And then we've got this one, nonprofits get it done, which is the main tagline.
Does that mean you're switching out your iconic baseball cap for the...
Well, maybe we can do like something like this. And I also got, let's see if I can pull it out here. This one's from Cal Nonprofits, United, Fearless, Powerful, which I love. Yeah. So I'm down with all of these. How does that look? Is that
great.
A good look?
In the last couple of years, I've really started to grow out my baseball cap collection, and I definitely have a couple from NCN. And I think I mentioned we're going to be launching some new swag in the coming months too. Yes. And I'm so excited. I'm ready to shop for my nonprofit swag.
Here's
wonderful.
Here's one of ours in the black.
Love it.
You don't have to put it on now. I don't want to mess up your hair.
Love it. I'll definitely wear it.
Fantastic. So new swag coming. And how can people participate in the Nonprofits Get It Done? Are there things that people should be doing, thinking right now?
Well, I think that's really important because so much of our conversation has been the scary things that are out there in DC that are happening right now. Yeah. And I don't want to leave people with the impression that it's so overwhelming that there's nothing that can be done, because part of the administration's strategy is to overwhelm us, to deplete us, to exhaust us. And sometimes I feel like that. But it's really important for all of us to recognize that there are things that we can do to push back against these threats. And when we do it collectively, it can have an enormous impact. So first, I'd recommend that folks check out our website to get connected to their local, regional, or state association of nonprofits. By doing that, they automatically become a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. And we frequently send out alerts to folks who are on our subscriber list to let them know, hey, this is what's happening right now, and here's an easy action that you can take to push back. Sometimes it's just signing on to a letter. Sometimes it's calling your member of Congress. But we want to make sure that we're not just leaving nonprofits without something effective that they can do so that we can push back. So it's really important that folks get connected to us, but there's lots of different ways that people can get involved.
Do you want to tell folks the web address?
It's councilofnonprofits.org. If you go onto the website, you'll see, as Rusty said, there's a map. You can find the state or regional association in your area. Get connected to them. They do great work at the state level. And then by doing that, you can be a part of NCN and our movement.
And you have newsletters, too, which are great. People can get those whether they're a member or not.
That's right. We have the Champion newsletter. We have the Essentials newsletter. I help oversee the Champion newsletter. It's all about what's happening in D.C., what's happening at the state level in terms of policy, what's the news that you need to know and be aware of. And we try to really weed out the important structural news, the news that you need to know versus the noise. So people can go onto the website there and sign up for our newsletters too.
Excellent. Yeah. So go to councilofnonprofits.org, sign up for the newsletter, make sure you join your state association to become part of the National Council of Nonprofits as well. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on to the Fund the People podcast. And thanks to you and your colleagues for the work you do. It's so important.
Love it. Thanks for having me. It was a blast. I hope to join again.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.